Hey guys, welcome back. So part two, we're going to look a little closer at building up the river so it looks a little nicer. Maybe add some islands in the middle. We're left off with a perfectly flat bottom, which really isn't very interesting for anyone to drive through. So let's get to it, I guess. So the first thing I wanted to show you is how to deal with these steep banks on the side. So what we're going to do is grab our geometry tool. We're going to go down and we're going to use a smooth this time. We'll leave the value at about 60. Fall off we're going to put back down to 25-ish. We'll use about an 8 brush. And all we're going to do is use this smooth brush to gently bring the bank down without really creating any sharp corners or anything. So it's a pretty quick way to move a small amount of ground without making a mess, basically. So we can just work our way down the bank. Remember to keep the water flowing towards the river is pretty important. Just gives it that real natural look. So basically we just want to run down the side, just clean it up a little bit, and it's just going to help make it look a little more realistic as the ground enters into the river. So what we're really going to do today is we're going to work on this little spot of the river and make it look alive. So first things first, we need to get this river a little more articulation up and down on the ground to make it something fun to drive through. So this part of the river, we're definitely going to make it interactive. It's not going to be a place where you'll drown a truck, but you should hopefully have a hard time through. So what we're starting off with is just a quick run through, and we're going to bring the level up so that we're close to the water level, but we don't want much sticking out. We will pick a few spots where we're going to come a little bit higher and maybe bring that brush back down to about 50. And we're going to sneak a bit of land out because I always enjoy putting a bit of island in the river. It helps break it up a bit. It gives you a point to take a break when you're crossing a river, and it just adds a lot more pleasantness to even the look, really. So we'll just do this one small corner essentially, so I don't waste 45 minutes of time doing the same thing over and over for you guys. So one thing you really want to keep an eye on is your islands can't block water like this. The flow goes with the river, so you're not going to have islands in the middle. You want your anything you build to be with the flow of the water. So what I'll do here is bring my brush back down to about a -22, and we'll just get rid of the middle of that so that it still has a natural spot for the water to flow through. So the next thing we want to look is that right there is going to be a little bit deep for a truck to get through. So we want to bring it up a bit. So we're going to keep our brush at 7. We're going to put our value right in around that 30 mark and just lightly bring it up. Again, we don't want it flat. You want it to be challenging to get through, but you don't want them to bury their vehicle as soon as they put it into the river. So we'll just go through. We'll just make sure everything's roughly okay. You do want some deep spots because you don't want them to just drive through with no challenge. And then basically all we're going to do real quick is we're going to switch back to the flatten tool at about a 4, and we're just going to take the pointiness out of this island just so it looks a little bit more natural. If you have sharp angles in this game, it ruins the immersion pretty quick. So you do want to make sure you go over and just make everything look okay. Underwater, you'll never notice it, and we'll cover it up anyways. Alright, so we're going to hit the button and rebuild. So now we got the starting of a bit more rivery looking place. So the next thing we're going to do is grab our PBR material. We're going to have ground, put that probably about a 70. We're going to leave the brush at 75 because we want to feather the grass in a bit. We're going to use about a 3 brush. I'm actually going to put the value back down to 60. I'm just going to lightly, oh, my apologies, we have to go to gravel. So we'll put gravel minus 40. We're just going to lightly paint some grass. You want to leave rocks around the side because the water's going to have interacted with that ground and it's not going to have much growing on it. So just a light little covering. I'm clicking. I don't hold the button doing this because it won't give you as natural of a paint. We'll just do just a little bit on all the islands we put up. And I think that's all of them. So there, we can rebuild. So now the next thing we're going to do is we're going to put a little bit of bushes and trees on here. Now be mindful, islands this small aren't going to have anything very big on them. So predominantly bushes is what we're going to put on these. And you can paint it pretty heavy. There won't be that many that spawn on it. So just label the paint on it and that'll be good. So now we got a little bit of growth on these. I'm going to put a little bit more in these little guys, see if we can get anything else. And then if you like, just for good measure, we can do the same with the trees. And again, just to ensure that we don't have anything too large on such small islands, we'll go to our scale. We're going to back it right down to about 18. And we'll just paint all these aspens and birches a bit smaller so we don't have any massive trees. Alright, so now we have a little bit nicer looking spot. So the next thing we're going to do is, and I messed it up on the first video, was making the rocks ignore water, which means they will spawn under the water. And in this case with the river, we want that. So we're going to go down, we have ignore overlays, which would be a road, a cliff, anything like that. We have ignore water, which is any water body. And then we have ignore mud, which means ignoring mud and it will spawn on top of mud. Any distribution has those 3 settings, so depending what you want to do with it, you can adjust them as necessary. So we've added ignore water true to the rocks. So now when we click off, we will rebuild just to have a quick look at everything with the shadows and trees placed, and then we should have rocks underneath the water this time, which we missed out on when we did it last time. Oh, I think I hit it wrong again. I did overlay again. Well, there, you guys have seen the mistake a couple times. You shouldn't do it. Okay, so ignore water, true. Do that one more time. And there we go. Now we have our rocks. So you can see with the scale we painted last time, we have a lot of variety in sizing, which is nice and helps it look a little more natural. So next thing we're going to do is we're going to start playing with this water flow a bit. So when using water, there's a couple different methods you can do. You can leave it without a flow chart, and basically you have what you see. It'll follow where you put your nodes. It doesn't follow everything perfectly, but it looks okay. Or you can go into your settings, into your water settings, and you're going to go to flow. So what you need to do is, this is a directional painting tool that will give you your water flow. So if you want it to go the way it is right now, we're just going to put the value up to 70, leave the fall off the same. And if we paint down, the water will go that way. And if we paint the opposite direction, it'll change color and go the opposite direction. So just so you can see, we have a flow like that. So if we go to the river and we enable our flow map, it will start looking at the value we painted, and it's going to change the direction of the water where we painted it. So you can see we have two different directions of water here that followed our painted flow map. So if we go back in to our flow and we paint that all green in the one direction, it's gone and we have our regular flow back. So what I tend to do laying down water, and I'm still learning, this is new with Snowrunner and it's challenging, but is to leave your flow at around 70. I usually use a brush of about maybe anywhere from 4 to 6, and leave your fall off up. You don't want sharp edges when you're doing this, but we're going to paint a little disruption, I guess you would say, in the water, because a river does not flow perfectly through a shallow spot like this. So we're going to keep all the direction basically the same way, but keep in mind a bank like this is going to turn. So we want a little turn to the water, and then it's going to straighten out in the channel. Or when you get to an island, you're going to have the water splitting the direction of each island just a little bit. You don't want it to be too noticeable. And if you mess up, you can always just come in and give yourself a nice downstroke of green just to straighten the flow back out. We're just going to give a couple light little paints, and then we're going to add just some direction. Remember, again, that a river never really flows straight, so you don't want it to be too man-made. You got to give some I guess irregularity to it. So there, I hit the button the wrong way. All we got to do to cover it up is just paint the opposite direction. So now we're going to shut that down, and you're going to see the water has more of a deke around the islands now, rather than acting like it flows straight through it. So again, that's going to take a while to perfect. I'm still working on it. It's challenging to really make it look good, so just keep at it, don't get discouraged. And then the last part of this, we're going to use our foam setting in the water, which is basically going to give us that rough, rapid look in the water. So I'm going to put my brush about 3.5. We're going to go to about 62 on the value, and fall off usually around 40. All we're going to do is try to be mindful of where the water would move the quickest, or bounce off islands, or just basically where it's going to change directions and cause disturbed flow. Because really all we're doing right now is adding just extra turbulence. And if you don't do enough, it looks kind of funny, and if you do too much, it just looks like one big blue rapid. So it's going to take some practice to get through here. But the other thing you want to keep in mind is, like everything else when you're building maps, is you want this to be random. Don't try and follow a pattern per se. You want different spots, different colors. An outside corner like this is going to have a lot of turbulence as the water changes direction. Just keep in mind stuff like that. So now we rebuild, and we have a little more flow to it, and you can see where we've changed the water direction a little clearer once you put this down. So next thing we want to do is add a little bit of rocks to this. So what we need to go to distribution. We are going to add Rocks Big USA, I believe it's called. And then we need to save it into the game. And make sure you don't just call it Rocks if you called the other one Rocks, because you can't have the same file names. .tga, enter. Okay, so these rocks you want to be careful with. If you make them full size, the textures just go funny, so I usually work around a 70 value on the brush. This fall off 0 because you want the rocks to go where you're putting them. And we're just going to paint where you'd see a rock. I try to keep in mind that probably in the leading edge of the water of a island is a good place for a rock. A few along the sides, any shallow spot. It always looks good to have a few rocks poking out of the ground or out of the water in a shallower part of the river. Helps sell it a little more. So we're just going to randomly place it. And then the other thing we need to remember with this is we have to add the ignore water setting. Otherwise, none of these things will spawn. So we're going to go down here, try and hit the proper one this time. True for ignore water. Let it rebuild. And now we've got ourselves a few rocks. So the next thing we want to do is run through the area that we just painted with rocks with the scale brush, and we can make a few of them bigger. The ones under the water you won't notice textures as much, so you can make those maybe a little bigger just so you get a rock popping out of the water a bit and giving you that slightly more realistic look. The next thing we can do after this too is we can always move ground up if we want to show more rocks sticking out of the water. So quick little scale, rebuild. Now we have some slightly bigger rocks. We can go through an area like this, and let's go back to our height tool. We want to use 20 to 30 brush max, or it's going to pull it up too quickly on us. Just bring it up a little bit higher, and then we'll put a few more rocks on here and just help make it look like a spot that you can actually maybe get your truck across. And that's a deceiving part too, is sometimes if a rock's sticking out you may think it's shallow, and it's always a fun joke to play on the players, make them guess. So really now we see a lot more flow, we see a lot more direction. A spot like this I would definitely toss a couple more rocks into. It just seems like a spot that should have a few more rocks sticking out of the river. So we didn't get any there, so we're going to scale up again. Just see if we can make them a little bit bigger. So really you see, with a little bit of messing around, and I'm telling you the river is going to be the hardest part for you guys to master. It really adds a lot of life to what we can do. So if I had a spot like this, I would definitely go to the water tool to foam. And we're just going to put a little bit more there because it just looked too clear. And don't be afraid to come back in here as you lay the rocks and just pick through a little more and add a little more diversity to the flow. And really all it's going to do is help make your river look a little better. So I think what we'll do is we're going to rebuild. And we'll see what this looks like with some shadows, and maybe we'll work a few more trees down into the middle of the river, or to the edge of the river, sorry. And see how it turns out at that point. Alright guys, so there's a quick insight in how we build rivers. I'm getting better at this, but it takes a lot of time to learn how that flow tool works. So thanks a lot. Any questions, comments, things you'd like me to focus on, please leave in the comments. Catch me on my Discord, whatever you need. I'm always looking for new ideas, or if people are having a particularly hard time with something, I have no problem picking it up and doing a little feature on it. Hopefully we can sort stuff out and make it easier for all of us. Thanks a lot, guys. Talk to you soon.